This is lesson number 2 in the packet for simplifying radicals. Properties for radicals. When you multiply radicals, it can be just as easy as multiplying the numbers together. Kind of think about them as the same type of term. The square root of 2 times the square root of 3 equals the square root of 6. The same property doesn't apply for addition. It does apply for division, which we'll get to in another video, but it won't apply for the subtraction. All right, so multiplication. Multiply and simplify. The square root of 5 times the square root of 6 is the square root of 30. Simplify. This is the idea of breaking it down with your factor tree. 3 and 10, 5 and 2. I have no pairs, so the square root of 30 is reduced. The square root of 6 times the square root of 6 is the square root of 36. I can do the square root of 36. It is just a plain old 6. Square root of 11 times the square root of 50 is the square root of 550. I'm going to break it down. I'm going to try to be smart about the values I choose. By picking a perfect square, I guarantee myself some pairs. That's a 5 and a 5. That's a 2 and an 11. So there's my pair. 5 square root, the 22 is going to stay a 22 because 2 and 11 aren't the same pair. Letter D, square root of 13 times the square root of 3 is the square root of 39. Let's break it down. 9 doesn't go in. I don't think the square root of 39 breaks down. It's 3 and 13. Letter E, this is where it starts getting a little bit more confusing for my students. Notice we have the number on the outsides. These are your coefficients. Handle your coefficients on their own and the square root on their own. So negative 2 times 3 is negative 6. Now take the square roots. The square root of 24 times the square root of 8 equals the square root of 192. That negative 6 is a normal number. It doesn't break down. It's already outside of the square root. What needs to break down is the 192. 192 is, well, I started with 2 and 96. Probably should have picked some better terms. 3 and 32. 32 is 16 and 2. 16 is 4 and 4. I see pairs, so I'm going to stop. I have a pair of 2s, so it looks like my negative 6 is out here. Oh, let me write it this way. My negative 6 is out here. That pair of 4s is going to come out. That pair of 2s is going to come out. And the only number that's left is this 3. So negative 6 times 4 is 24. 24 times 2, so it's 48, square root 3. Letter F, similar as well. I have these coefficients out in front. 4 times negative 3 is negative 12. The square root of 6 times the square root of 8 is equal to the square root of 48. 48, 16 and 3. 16 gives me my pair. My negative 12 is still outside. It's joined by the pair of 4s, and that 3 is left inside. So negative 12, 24, 36, 48, square root 3. Letter G. Don't let this one fool you. It looks harder than it really should be. It's a coefficient of 3 times half. 3 times 1/2 is 3½ or 1.5 if you'd prefer. The square root of 5 times the square root of 12 is the square root of 60. 60 is 4 and 15. 4 breaks down into 2 and 2. So that 1.5 is going to be joined by the pair of 2s. 15 doesn't break down into 2 pairs, so it stays as it is. 1.5 times 2 is 3. The trick to these is handling those outside numbers like outside numbers, the inside numbers as your square root rules. And I really do recommend saying it to yourself. A normal 3 times a normal 1/2 or a normal 2 times a normal 3 will help you. And when you deal with the square roots, say them. Square root of 6 times the square root of 8 gives you the square root of something. Might help keep track of which numbers are which. On the next page, there's a handful of practice. I'm going to pause my video. I'm going to fill them out. I suggest you do the same, and then you can check. All right, here are my answers to the problems. For number 1, I got the square root of 21. It doesn't break down any further, so that's it. Number 2, I got the square root of 24, and it did break down. Number 3, I got the square root of 55, didn't break down. Number 4, I got 6 times the square root of 30. 6 stays alone. Square root of 30 just didn't happen to break down again. For number 5, an exponent of 2 means I'm multiplying the square root of 8 2 times. So the square root of 8 times the square root of 8 was the square root of 64. Type it in your calculator if you don't believe me, but the square root of 64 is 8. A normal 8, not a square root, 8. Number 6, I wrote down what was inside that square. 3 square root 2 times 3 square root 2, 3 and 3 is 9. Square root 2 times square root 2 is the square root of 4. Well, the square root of 4, again, if you don't believe me, do it in your calculator. It is a plain old 2. 9 times 2 is 18. And then that letter G is a duplicate from the previous page. That concludes today's video. Please let me know if you have any questions.